All right. We're unmuted. Hello, everybody. How's it going? Welcome to our meetup. We're going to start with a couple of announcements really quickly from Max, but we're talking about the relationship between design and engineering. This is a co-hosted meetup between Oklahoma City Design+Tech as well as TulsaUX. We're both a part of Techlahoma's user groups. So, Max.
Alec, thank you. Thanks for having. I did put my phone on you. That's how this starts. Hey, everyone. Coming to you live from Tulsa, Oklahoma. Thank you for having us in this joint collab meetup. Excited to talk today. Real quick announcements for TulsaUX. We do want to talk about our next meetup, which is June 8th. Excited to say that we're going to have Dean Schuster. He's founder and partner of TrueMatter. That's a user experience strategy firm. He's been a huge advocate for user-centered digital products. He oversees TrueMatter. He's leads strategic engagements from innovative regional organizations. His work's always included researching, prototyping, and testing digital products with real users. He speaks all the time, teaches experience design, strategy, usability, UR, content strategy, et cetera, et cetera. Excitedly, though, he's going to give us talk why UX matters. In it, we're going to learn why the smartest user experience decisions are enormously important. Really excited to have him, and that is June 8th. We are doing virtual and possibly in person. I'm confirming it right now, but tentatively, I can say almost safely, because they said they added this to the calendar, that we're going to be over at Holbert and Tulsa campus. Get to use their big stage, and it'll be a nice fun big face. So definitely tune into that, or show up in person if you're in Tulsa. Yep, pumped about it. Thank you.
It's awesome. Yeah, UX matters. So great message. For Oklahoma City Design+Tech, I just want to say a couple of things before we get started with the talk. Again, this is a meetup group. We're sponsored by Techlahoma. We support design thinking kind of exercises and getting conversations around user experience to happen here in the greater Oklahoma City area. Techlahoma, if you don't know about Techlahoma is a tech-centered organization focusing on marketing tech education accessible to everyone in the Oklahoma area. They provide resources to help stream and broadcast events. And then they help provide foods for an event like this. But of course, we're still remote. So once we go back to kind of in person, we'll include food. But for now, you'll have to make do with what your pantry has. Yeah, so Techlahoma events are a safe space for everybody. If you have any questions or concerns, check out the Techlahoma Code of Conduct book on the Techlahoma website, or reach out to anybody on the Techlahoma board if you have any issues. And then just the talk today, we're going to keep most of the interactions centralized in our Slack group. We have a channel dedicated to Oklahoma City Design+Tech. It's #UG, #UG, OKC Design+Tech. So check us out there. I'm going to be keeping an eye on my Slack over here throughout the talk, because I want to make sure if y'all have questions, if y'all have concerns, you can reach out and kind of interact with the panel as well as myself. So with that, I'm going to introduce a couple of. I'm really excited to have our panel here today. We have Vincent. Steven's a software architect. He's worked in every area of the software development lifecycle. In Steven's own words, I enjoy front-end technologies and the people who create them because I get to bring people's thoughts and ideas into the real world.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Steven and I got to work together a little bit at Legal Shield. So he's a great guy. We're really excited to have him here today. We also have Max. Max is a front-end web developer and a UX designer. He's been working in the industry for the better part of a decade, making websites and online experiences better, faster, and more accessible. And also in Max's copious free time, He runs TulsaUX and is a conference chairperson for Techlahoma. So if you guys have gotten to attend any of the Techlahoma conferences, Max has had a hand in that.
Yeah.
Which has been awesome. Yeah. And then we also have Karina Buvilik. Bavilik. I'm sorry.
No, you were so close. You were so close. No, you're good.
I reached out trying to make sure I had it correct, and I still got it incorrect. Bavilik.
We're close though.
So Karina is a UX designer and digital analyst, currently working on the agency side. She's worked on improving user experiences on sites varying from local banking to international business-to-business e-commerce platforms outside of work. She's usually planning trips post-COVID or wasting time on Reddit rabbit holes or decorating her house with amazing plants and suede couches.
Oh, yeah.
I like salsa.
Cool. So awesome. And I'm Alec. I'm a lead product designer, currently working with Legal Shield in Oklahoma City. I sit on the Oklahoma City Design+Tech kind of, I guess, like, I'm just a volunteer. I don't know if there's any sitting I do, but sweet. So we're going to talk about the relationship between design and between engineering. Sometimes it can be a strained one. Sometimes it can be very smooth, but we have three people that have a ton of experience working in that realm. What do y'all say? Should we hop into it?
Heck yeah.
Cool. Let's do it.
Cool. So hopefully this stays very casual as far as the conversation goes, and everybody will just jump around and have ideas shared throughout. But kind of to get us started out with something pretty interesting, and we were having a conversation about this in our Slack channel yesterday. What's the worst handoff experience that you've ever had? We can start out with kind of the nightmare relationship between design and engineering, if that's from your position and in design, or working as an engineer, getting specs handed to you, or
oh man.
do
Who's going
you want to
first?
start us off, Steven?
Okay. Oh man. I kind of like gave this as like in our Slack channel, but like kind of to go into it was, I will try not to bash on business too much during this panel talk. Almost all of my stories are not really the transition between, a design person or team, or really development, but normally the breakdown of communication between the two. And there is a lot of situations that can occur where that breakdown happens. Sometimes it's in your project, management staff. Sometimes it's in a meeting. Sometimes it's in the software you guys use because the tools aren't shared. But this particular instance was we were using Jira from the development standpoint, and the designers have created a huge document, and the project manager in charge decided to just like take like a couple of screenshots of that design document, screenshots, mind you, where this was a clickable PDF. Like it had so much content, but they took screenshots of it and then just threw it in a ticket and said like what the feature was called, and it was expected to then get done. And I'm like, so
you didn't really even have access to your design?
No. It was like there was like a brick wall, and I had 1,000 questions. I'm like, a picture says 1,000 words, but so do 1,000 words. So, just getting a design document, just a piece of it, and then putting it in a ticket, like that handoff was like, and I mean, it was not a feature. It was like a full feature suite. Imagine like, I won't even talk about the feature, but it's like, imagine a whole login, like registration system. And it was just like, make this thing. Okay.
Yeah.
So that was painful to work on.
I can imagine. Yeah. It's really tough whenever you don't have that line of communication.
Well, especially when you think about it, like, it's not just an image, right? It's like how do these forms work together? What's an error message look like? What are our color codes that we're dealing with? Like there's so much of those small details that all amount to one massive feature. And so, yeah, I mean, and you guys already have those meetings, right? Design has those meetings. They vet that information. Yeah. They get the design documents, and then I'm not provided with it. So it's like,
And
what
you're
was the
stepping
point?
into this team as a contract resource, or
Correct. Yeah, that's what I was. So I'm already an outsider. So I'm like, is this a failure on my part for not knowing this, or was there a breakdown of communication? So
yeah, and it can feel like that. It can feel like it's your own fault for like
yeah.
I should have done something different, or I should. Yeah. Anyway, Max, Karina, do you?
Yeah. So in a previous life before Mozilla, I worked for some advertising agencies. I can speak a little bit more cautiously because I think the entire web department's defunct now, so it's not nearly as. I'm not speaking ill of. I am speaking ill of the dead, I guess would be the description. All that said, though, this would have been a lot earlier in my career. I jumped on this team. I was one of 6 developers, and the sales team would basically pitch to a client, "Hey, you need a new website, and we'll design it for you." And then the designer would go over into Photoshop and lay out this beautiful desktop-sized website, desktop-like layout. Like, cool, here's the website. Go build it, and just we wouldn't even. I don't know if there was a kickoff meeting beyond like an email with a link to like the PSD download, and like, oh, like, and it's. This was, I would say, the mid 2010s, the mid hot teens.
So,
that was the problem is that we could make that work, and so no one ever learned a lesson. But the big conversation I remember having on this first project where they handed off this 960 wide image was, I said, "Well, where's the mobile comp?" They said, "What mobile comp?" For how this needs to look on a phone, like, "Oh, just squish it." Was the
no.
And just make smaller.
Just like install like a New Hope, just compact it.
Right. Yeah, you were putting it in the trash compactor and putting.
And that was for sure. Like I say, the worst handoff. It happened multiple times. But why I bring that story up is that actually was one of the big genesis moments for why I got into UX. Is I was like, we have no handoff. We have no consideration for development when y'all are pitching projects, when you're designing projects. And Stephen called it out perfectly. It's communication, and it's having those conversations early and often enough to raise flags one way or the other. And by the end of my time at that company, the process was what it should have been, which is having design and development work in tandem, and it's an iterative process. And there's give and take, and there's conversations, and I was able to, like, by the end, put dollar amounts on, like, hey, if we had this conversation a month ago, all of that work that happened wouldn't have happened. That's what not talking cost you. And like,
oh man, I bet you were not popular with that conversation.
And that's what you had that conversation once, and now the whole team like evangelizes communication because you just showed them the money that could have been. And that's how you get any grease in agency work, is by the dollar talking. So Karina, what about you?
So also agency side, and this has been a little bit, but not far enough in the past. We were working with a large client, and they had an e-commerce store hosted, on a different, like a subdomain, and it was tied to this old clunky inventory system that they were not going to be able to change quickly. I guess in the kickoff meeting, the client development team, because we were working with their external resource, was not included. Neither was I. And we're going through it. I'm looking through documentation. Ideally, I should have been there. And we get to the point where I'm walking through flows. We've got, all of our prototypes ready to go. And talking with the client, they were not able to implement what we were recommending. And this was like 2 months into the work because nobody included neither their dev team or myself. And there was no technical requirements documentation. There was no communication because we weren't, I wasn't allowed to communicate with the developer and vice versa. Plus there was a project manager who really didn't understand either the dev environment and what I need to know. And, on their end of like, well, what can we work together and recommend? And so it's, you have authenticated users, can't create a portal for them because it's not going to work with their ordering system. You have to basically start over. It's not good.
Wow.
Good.
Yeah, and I think something interesting about that is, and I know Stephen, you're gonna have some good insight into this, is like how involved in the design process and involved early on does an external team and people kind of stepping in a contract role want to actually be in the design process just in general.
Yeah, there's a Venn diagram, and I try to look for it, because I was thinking about it when we were kind of like, talking in the Slack channel, the past few days. But as a Venn diagram, it's like really powerful with pretty much like everything that we're talking about right now, which is, you have your designers and you have your dev teams or engineers, whatever you classify it as, the technology aspect of it. And on one, you have the creative like ideas and what the users are wanting, what the ask is. And then on the other side, you have all the technologies that you currently have to play with, right? You have all your libraries, you have your different components, your services. And then in the middle, that's where your feature is created, because, the design department and the creatives that create the vision and the features and the flows, they need to know what to work with, right? Because something as simple, and I kid you not, like something as simple as like a login is so complex, because it's like, oh, I want to do this and create this, but then a developer goes, oh, we actually have single sign-on, so we can't do that, or we don't have any of those functionality yet, so that's a whole can of worms that we're not going to open, and then that completely changes the whole flow. Just as something as simple as a button, right? Like, and so it's like Karina's not able to like talk to a developer. Like that's the first thing you said, like we weren't able to talk to him. And then it was found later on. Had that been just one question or one conversation, that could have all been avoided by simply saying that like, oh, that we, like for instance, I worked with a client and they only used a Kendo library. They will not allow anything else. They would not use any material libraries of any kind, no Bootstrap, no nothing. It was literally just Kendo. And if it wasn't in that wheelhouse and a specific version, mind you, then it's an instant no. And that's a designer, like, that's like a requirement. If you don't have that technology minimum, you're binding their hands. So
yeah, it sets up the dev team for failure. And, it's easy to make jokes. I've, made it myself about, oh, well, I made this, this process went great, and then dev didn't quite do it. But at the same time, the development department tends to be the one that gets, pardon my language, but crapped on the most, because it's a dev, and nobody thought about, well, can our development team do this? Can they build this? Will be able to do analytics and tracking with what they have? Will they be able to have databases speaking? And then we get there, everybody, gets upset at development, the project doesn't launch, but that could have been avoided at the very beginning. So,
Yeah.
I've always used that term as like silo busting, to really break those down.
I like that.
Because if you're, like you said, if you're siloed, like that's going to happen every time, and you're always going to be finger pointing to the other team.
Yeah.
Sorry to Alec. I wanted to ask a question to the other two. I was curious.
Do it, man.
Not to steal your moderator duties. How much has your actual tool set helped or hurt the handoff process? So like contrasting from, like I said, I brought up Photoshop or like, Sketch to Figma. Has that, what's your tech tool stack right now, and how has that helped or hurt?
So I use Figma now. I've started using it with our UI designers and with dev. It's made it a lot easier because, it's originally when I first started with UX and doing information architecture and wireframing, I used OmniGraffle, and you can't,
OmniGraffle.
Yeah. And so, not on the recommended list anymore. But, you share that information. I had tons of documentation, but, one, I realized a lot of people don't quite like to read through it, and it's not very tangible. So, and it's hard to make notes on stuff. I mean, I get it. And Figma's been a lifesaver. OmniGraffle did not really work for our team.
Yeah. It's funny because I actually started working with Alec in my first experience with how powerful tools like Sigma can actually be, because, usually those are created into a document, and then they're passed, through the telephone line and eventually get to someone like, yeah, exactly. That filter, right? Like we were talking about, that wall. And then it's like from exactly what Max said, from one silo to another, and eventually it gets to me and it's like, here's your thing. And it's like, oh, thanks. But Alec and his team did a really good job with someone like me, because like the first thing I have been conditioned to not ask for permission to access those things. It's like, why? That's not your sandbox, right? But Alec was the first one. It was just like, do you want to look at it? I can get you access. And I was just like, what? Like, I can have access? And he's like, yeah, sure, man, no problem. And within like 30 seconds, I had access, and I was clicking around and looking at stuff. And that sort of interaction solved so many problems for me. Like, I kid you not, like that tool stack was then immediately added to my own. So I took that. I was like, I'm gonna use that from now on, because most developers use free. It's like, if it's free, I'm gonna use it, right? Like, I'm a unique developer where I actually have, an Adobe subscription. I do subscribe, and I have some of those tools because as a contractor, I kind of want to make sure I can always say, yes, I can open that file without having to download GIMP or something else. That I know those are cringe words for you guys, but like for us, it's free. So I'm like, yeah, it's great.
Whenever I hear that somebody's like taking my things and put it into GIMP and are like, oh yeah, I just had to like crop this to like make it look right. I was like, no, please just talk to me next time. Let's not do that.
Yeah. Well, for me, it's like if I'm working with an SVG, I get handed up all these different styles and these icons, and I'm just like, I need this to slightly move, and I'm like, I'll just import this SVG into Inkscape, and then all I have to do is just like, boop, move this over just a little bit, and then I save it, and I'm like, I'm good to go, right? Like stuff like that. But it shouldn't have to be like that, because then now all of these files are now out of sync. The moment that happens, if the tools aren't shared, then I feel like your resources and your assets become jumbled up. It's like, why does this look different on her screen and than it does on your presentation, right? Like then that's where the finger pointing, so someone messed up somewhere. So
well, yeah, and you have multiple revisions, and if you're having to do a document, you're like version, if you're on, version 5, 6, and somebody doesn't, update a Basecamp ticket for somebody else with the new version, so there's like two different ones floating around.
Absolutely.
Versus the last saved, Figma or something.
Mm-hmm. And woe be it if someone names it final.
Oh,
God. Like final V1.5. I'm not a good. My naming conventions are.
Yeah. Hey, development is we have our own, like that's like, I feel like that's a meme for you guys, and development does the exact same thing where we just like, ours is copy, because we'll copy something over, and then Windows or Linux will underscore copy, and then it'll be underscore copy, or parentheses 1, parentheses 5, and it's like, oh, you're having to look at date timestamps.
I think, I think like Figma in general has made everything so much, like not to toot Figma's horn too much in this talk, but maybe we should. But it's made it so much nicer for like managing versions and managing like what's the most up to date and what's where to find those things.
Yeah. There's something on that same note that I kind of wanted to bring up. So from what Max was talking about, his story and what you're kind of bringing up as far as versions go, that's kind of like another handoff thing that I think is great, but it also requires a communication between both departments, is because cross-platform back in the day used to just mean different browsers, and that's what it was treated as. But nowadays, the mobile market is taking up, like, I think I looked at the statistics, the majority of the mobile market is taking up over 60%. So it's now the majority, it's not the minority. And so people like to throw the whole mobile first development or mobile first design, but I'm like, you have to incorporate what cross-platform means now, because it also doesn't just mean, Safari, Firefox, Chrome, and the big three, but it also means, different devices, different resolutions, and your platform extends beyond the browser if it's web development. And it also, you have to take that into consideration, because if you don't, situations like what happened with Max come into play, where it's like, you could clearly tell mobile was not anywhere in their wheelhouse, and then they just told you to squish it down. And it's like, that's not how this works. You can't make it work like that.
And the dilemma with that, I think, and that goes on, this may be more of a critique on agencies, and that's how like websites are sold. And like to sometimes, especially at that C-suite level for these big companies, all they want to see is big, sexy pictures on a big wide screen. Like like it's difficult to sell that. And actually I say like prototyping really helped, because all of a sudden you could put like, oh, here's the mobile version, and it's not just like this little skinny one on a big conference screen. Instead you could just hand them a phone.
Yeah.
That helped so much.
Yeah.
And I think that's where I will say like InVision really helped. When I started at Mozilla, we were using Sketch and InVision was like the design tool stack, and handing off from that with like Inspector, and you could get some specs out of it. Moving to Figma, what's been so much better for that, I think, is that like one of the things leveraged with InVision was that it was just web-based, so everybody had access to it. With Figma, it's the exact same excitement, except it works on everybody's machine. Sketch was a walled garden for Mac. Adobe, like I say that I've never used Adobe on Linux. I don't know what the support is there, but
Terrible.
I can't imagine. Yeah, that's okay. I was going to just.
I don't know about Adobe support on Mac these days, to be honest.
Yeah.
I feel like Adobe support
True.
is all gone.
Well, and so that's where, like, again, not to toot Figma's horn, but like the accessibility of anyone who has a browser can contribute helps so much. Again, it's a silo buster, and it's giving everyone access to look at the comps, to comment, to do all the things they need to. Between that and I would say like prototyping itself has helped so much. I think it like helped designers kind of bring their vision to life and explain specifically when you get to animations or transitions, everything, what's possible. And I remember from both sides, one designing some really slick prototypes and like handing it over, and they would be like, nope, it doesn't do that. If we need to do that, we have to do it in a different framework. And the whole conversation, like, okay, great, let's do it in a different framework then, and let's have that conversation. And it's such a catalyst for conversation.
Oh, absolutely. Like one of a quick story like about kind of what you're talking about that was really, it was an eye opener for a designer, and they had created the mobile version, right? And so their navigation, like most, was a little navigation drawer, right? So your classic hamburger buttons, but they only had the one. So they were like, they used originally the original design that was the one in the current version was having the hamburger button on the top right. You know, traditionally you may see it more on the left, but they were like, this is the only button we have. Everything else is on there. The majority of like, it's something like 60, high 60s, low 70% of mobile users are right-handed. So it just made more sense to kind of make it a little bit easier.
Interesting.
And so that was the reasoning behind it, and it worked perfectly fine. But then they wanted to introduce a shopping cart preview feature. And before, the shopping cart was just a navigation item. So you just opened it up and no matter where you were, if you wanted to see your shopping cart. But they wanted to add just a simple feature of having the shopping cart always visible on the same bar, and then have like a little dot with like numbers in it saying how many it is. Real simple feature,
Sure, yeah.
adds a lot of user engagement. It's a great feature. But they had said, they had originally, when they designed it, they had switched it, the different version. So like now the hamburger button's over on the left, and then the new shopping cart icon is now pulled out of the menu over to the right. So they drastically changed that. And the problem with that is that they didn't take into account, like for development. So we got the spec. It's not that big of a problem to move those two icons over, by no means. But everything inside that drawer now was shifted over to the right, and everything was like right oriented. And there was a whole bunch of work that was done with that now has to be rethought of now from the left side. So, but again, the designers had no concept of that because they didn't realize that like they're just moving an icon for this. But had the tool been in place and collaboration had been done from the very beginning, exactly what Alec had said, he would see those different versions, and then that would be a no-brainer. But since those tools weren't, it was just like, here's this new feature, just move this button over here. So
yeah. I think that's really interesting, is like how you deal with like in a product's life cycle, starting with the MVP of a product, starting with a simple concept, but the design team, I mean, you're often thinking 3 features ahead, 4 features ahead of what the engineering team is building. And how do you kind of maintain those two and keep in mind like what is today's feature versus what is the features throughout your roadmap, and how do you progress and kind of scale successfully?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's tough. I've always described web development to designers as like a bizarro world. where what you think will take 1 second for us to do will take weeks. And what you think will take weeks to do will take us 1 second. There's been so many
amazing.
times like, oh, we've got all these changes. I'm so sorry, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, doop, doop, doop. It's done. And they'll be shocked. But then like exactly, Stephen, like you described, we just want to move the thing over here. No big deal.
Just swap the buttons.
I saw you build the thing just last week.
Yeah.
I'll have to use like human anatomy. I said, it's like you want me to take the heart and put it on my leg.
Yeah.
And I can't just imagining the fight. Karina, what's a big like feature upgrade where you've had that same kind of issue?
Yeah.
This actually happens fairly frequently because we have built, sites and whatnot from scratch. However, a lot of the time what we're doing is maybe updating a current one, or because part of the analytics is, the marketing team's sending stuff over. So along with user experience, I'm also thinking about what are tangible elements that I can also add that measure like, someone's pathway, how they click, etc. And one of the big issues has been our development team has to be able to go into sometimes really sloppy code, or really complex old code, trying to update these recommendations, either a mobile responsive sign-on or something that is, an updated user portal instead of, the client having to send in a PDF application. And being able to do that, it's been kind of a challenge because, for example, we started working with this e-commerce company, huge international sales, specifically in the EU, using old front end, old back end, etc. I mean, and it was built like in some old Umbraco. It was bad. It was not good. And so what we wanted is, application option, easy for, account creation. And I made a flow, and our dev team is like, this is not a way that we can have authenticated users on there because the way their data is structured, we are not going to be able to do it that way. And so, and it's not like a sexy example, but it's one that we come across a lot, it's developers having to go in, or, there's marketing campaigns and people are like, hey, throw up a landing page, Karina, we need you to set up the structure and then measure it. And the template is so different, or has to be, completely different than this, the site's currently set up, and they're basically having to build from scratch and then connecting the two. And it's,
Yeah. So, well, I think, that's definitely an agency specific, not agency specific. There's other fields where this would happen, but the takeover, like you said, like we just inherited someone else's website. Yeah. How do you design to it? How do you add features to it? And that's, again, I think it does come down to communication. And I think for any of those kinds of site breaking design changes, if you're having sanity checks with your developer often, it doesn't have to be daily, but near daily, like I would say, especially when you make some of those big sweeping changes, to make sure there's no just like looking for landmarks,
Well,
to me, I want to know about the sanity check. Tell me more about this practice.
So I don't know. Have y'all ever heard or used that term before for sanity check?
I have a meeting later this afternoon. It's a one-on-one, but I labeled it a sanity check, actually. Yeah. But that was
so I've had it from very different in different, because I do wear different hats. Working with design to say, hey, this is what we're thinking before I even show it to the whole team to get like brutal feedback. Let me know if any of this is just completely wildly impossible. And if so, I can take it back and start talking through that. So it's a very much more safe space to show big changes. Same thing for dev review. I've had some sanity checks of here's how I'm thinking about solving this feature before I go commit this code and show it to the rest of the team and look like an idiot. That's gonna be a PSA, is have the sanity check with someone you trust at work. Like that's a good thing to do.
I actually have a great example of sanity check that like really helped. I was surprised, to be honest, that a designer like came to me and asked me about it, because it was a very like low level kind of technical sort of question that I was like, how is this going to benefit you? Is it just curiosity? I'll talk to you about it. Like, I don't care, but it just seemed so low level that I felt like it was like, I'll talk. But the way that they described it, I was like, holy crap, that actually is like a good question. Like I never thought about that. And so it was in the calculation of VAT tax. And for anyone who's listening that doesn't know what that is, like in Germany, they have a VAT tax, and VAT tax has to be calculated within the final price. So in America, we do, this is $1.59, but then we have a tax for local government, and then they calculate it, and you get to the cashier, and they're like, it's $2. They don't do that in other countries. That's illegal. So you have to actually calculate it and tell your users what it is they're going to spend. And so their question is why does it was a flow question. When I click this, why can't you give me the price? Why do I have to click this, then go here to get my price? And that was an interesting question because I knew the answer, and it was because we had to calculate the VAT tax, and we had to calculate the VAT tax by going to a specific service, finding out where those people are located to get that, percentage, and then calculate it. So it was all a calculated call.
Right. It was very thought out from the engineering perspective.
Oh, it was a very advanced process because in the end, it's going to go to this user, and it's not just like, that'd be like saying that VAT tax is the same for everybody, and that's not the case. And so they were wondering why we had this extra step, and they were developing it for a new country. This is a global app that we're selling products across the world, and the current country they're dealing with didn't have VAT tax, so it didn't make sense for them from their narrow scope of this feature. Why that extra step exists. And I explained that to them. And so it was one of those moments where we had to have a sanity check because they were like, I see this current feature and it's XYZ, but why can't we just go from X to Z? This Y aspect of it is a redundant step. Why can't we streamline this process for our users? And the reason why is because for every other user, that step is important. And had we not had that conversation, their feature would have not had it, and we'd have gotten it to development and had to be the naysayer. And that's a crappy place to be, when you're a developer, because you're like, this is great, but it's just not possible. And it's like, I don't know. Now, Steven, you're the expert. And I'm like, I can't make this pop out of nowhere. I'm like,
if anyone can do it, you can.
Good for you. Like, no, I don't need compliments. I need a conversation. So. That's just one of those moments where it's like that sanity check. They literally just asked me this question. They probably got more than they chewed off for. They probably now like, I don't need to know what VAT tax is. I don't need to know what this or that is. But now that they do, it's like.
And what's the design perspective of that? Like how do you feel, Karina, whenever you're reaching out to the engineer and reaching out to the developer, asking something that might seem like a stupid question or?
Ooh, that's a great question.
Yeah, well, so I try not to be a dick about it. So if I can find the answer myself, I will try to find and then confirm with them instead of trying to have dev do the legwork for me. So another thing I did because my background was originally analytics and search and technical search and information architecture, they go hand in hand with user experience. And, when you're talking about, for example, an international site, when you're also talking about subdomains or directories, and how for users and languages and, shipping and what's, et cetera, EU, whatever, compliance, I collect all of my notes that I can find everywhere. And then I go to development and say, this is what's recommended here. Better one for technical search and flow, but also it makes sense from a, expected user behavior as well. Can we do this? Are you able to do this? What's your recommendation based on what we currently have? And that's when they're able to come with a solution that then I can apply later on. But I don't come in there and I don't like to come in and ask ambiguous or kind of large questions because they are giving me the best answer they know to meet, maybe my level of understanding of that, development environment, et cetera. But it might not be actually asking me this specific question I need the actual answer to.
Yeah, so you like to inform yourself and come in with that level of understanding. What were you going to add, Max?
No, it's funny. I love hearing that you have to come in with a little bit of research just so that they don't just ignore you and answer the right question. I feel like I've been on both sides of that. I think I might have I don't want to explain to you how it works. I can just tell you what I think you're answering, and then you don't get the answer you need at all. That's such a good. That's a good.
Like I want to know. Maybe I don't necessarily want to spend time learning a ton of development, but I do want to know enough to be able to at least know, so that I'm not constantly. And it also builds trust with the team, because when somebody just comes up and they're like, "You can do this, right?" or "What can't you do?" or whatever about that.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It's a disrespect, because also you're pulling that person away from their work, and kind of the way that analytics, you're sitting there and it's not the data collection, it's the analysis that you're kind of focused in. Same with code. You're having to sit there and think, and then you're breaking this person away from what they're doing, and they're going to have to go back into their work. You might as well come to them and have a conversation that shows that you care about what they have to do, instead of them doing the work for you.
Well, I think it's if you come at it like the way you're describing it, you're asking to be informed and also to have a conversation, as you put it, instead of like you had said, don't do this, but like don't go into the conversation with an assumption, because no one likes that, right? Because that can feel like not that, and this isn't from a developer standpoint. I think this is in any work, but if someone comes at you with an assumption, it's like they're telling you that if you say no, you are now forced in the position. If that is not true, if that assumption is incorrect, you are now on the defensive. And if it's a conversation, you're just exchanging information. But if it's an assumption and someone has to be on the defensive, that already can make that conversation a little bit more aggressive than it needs to be. And that's where I think that like we've been talking about this whole time, the conversation breakdown happens in a multitude of places. And so if you go into a question with an assumption, if it's wrong, if it's a bad assumption or an incorrect assumption, it can lead to some uncomfortableness.
The term that Karina pulled out though is the trust. And I think that's just as important to having the conversation as having that level of respect. And one thing I would say for designers who are handing off to development, inviting developers into your design process will also give you the foot in the door to like do a design review when they're in the middle of like when they have their alpha up, and actually being able to come back and sit and give constructive like changes and feedback to make it match the comp better. And a lot of times having that conversation could be a total pain if you completely ignored them during their process, because their answer is going to be, you didn't talk to me, or I would have told you that couldn't happen. And now you have a give and take dialogue, some trust to have that, like that you can I guess extend the open hand first by inviting them to your stuff to make a reason to get to go to theirs.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. What kind of that's really interesting. Like whenever the product is being built and there's this expectation of it should look a certain way, and then it comes back maybe to the designer and it doesn't look the way that you want. What's that feeling from your perspective, Karina, as the designer on that?
Well, I'm like,
you will not, first off, none of you guys will hurt my feelings. Be brutally honest. If you've ever had negative experience with developers, because I strive for that. I'm like, I love those experiences because that's how I'll grow. So if you guys are holding back at all, whenever Alec asks you a question, please don't.
I mean, normally, I'll be honest, I don't usually have too much of, I usually have a pretty decent working relationship with dev, because in the agency side, you're kind of almost like the white collar version of a restaurant, front of house, back of house, and then, we're somewhere in the middle. And dev especially, they are very much like back of house. And if you're not going to stand back the kitchen, they're not usually jerks about it. So, but there are times when, and it's usually from maybe a project management standpoint, where they're handed something off, nobody has a conversation, something launches, and certain, for example, you click on something and it goes nowhere, or back to the staging server, or just kind of dead ends somewhere, and you're just like, oh man. I'm like, yeah, you should have, I had documentation in there, but maybe the conversation would have just happened and we would have been fine. We could have gone through this before, and So
do you poke the bear, or do you have someone else poke the bear for you? Because I feel like that's kind of when that situation happens. It has to be addressed, or at least talked about.
Oh, I mean, if I'm looking at something and I'm like, because I like to click around because busybody, and so I'm like, oh, is this? I'm like, oh, there's an error here. I mean, I'll Slack somebody or be like, hey, this isn't working, or I'll like let the account or the project manager know, and then add me to the ticket. I have no problem being like, hey, this is not doing what it needs to, and it's a lot less of a thing now. But I mean, back in the day, when it happened more, it's hard to blame one person who wasn't included at the start or wasn't communicated with, especially in the early days when I didn't know to have that much upfront communication either. You just kind of, so.
Yeah.
Well, and that comes down to like I feel like this is way more of a panel of us talking how to talk to other people than how to package files, which I think that really
talking to other people is important.
It boils down to it. But Karina's right. Like when you're talking to a developer, it's asking, hey, I found a bug. What's the best way for me to hand this off? Do you want me to go open a ticket? Do I need to tell you directly? Do I need to have someone else do it on my behalf? And having that, again, now you're not blaming them. You're just saying, hey, I found something. Where do you want me to put it? And then let them triage it. And then it's still being taken care of, but it's that correct, not asynchronous, because you're still talking to them directly, but it doesn't require immediate, like, drop what you're doing and go fix this thing. Because oh my goodness. When I think back to agency life, it was definitely a lot of people walking over to the cubicle and,
oh my gosh, standing.
Hey, found a thing real quick, and then let me go touch your screen a little.
Oh no, the finger on the screen.
And now I'm like, this has gone off the rails. Not only did you interrupt me, I have to go fix something.
Or the ones that stand over the development team, and I'm like, they're going to enjoy standing there till the end of day when they'll get to your ticket, but you're not going to know because you don't know what that code looks like or what you do with it. I've seen it happen. I haven't intervened. I've just watched, and I'm like, I'll just walk away from your neck. But
yeah.
So I want to kind of move our conversation a little bit and talk about something more technical for a second here. I'm just kind of curious about, recently we've seen a really big growth in design systems, and the design system has had a major influence on how things are being built, how things are being maintained. Kind of what relationships have you guys had with design systems, and how have you seen that change processes within your own orgs?
So we have a really robust web design system, and I don't know, it's almost more of a code repository at this point, but it's where the implementations happen. That's if anyone wants to check it out, it's protocol.mozilla.org, and it lives and breathes and dies by its documentation, by being able to point designers to it, by being able to point developers to it. If you don't have that single source of truth like ready and available, it's not going to happen. And that, I think, there's been in the dream of a design system, a lot of times it's like you can send either a designer or a non-designer, but specifically a non-developer, over to your design system, and they can take their shopping cart and walk down the aisle and pick and choose what they need. And you should be able to have the conversation to build a page without talking to a designer or a developer, because that language is there. That's that's blue skies of an idea. But there's been instances where that's totally happened. And the thing you have to, I just had this conversation, I'll give a credit later out of who told me this, but like design systems are basically communication, ego, and communication, ego, at least, is like you have to be able to check those at the door when you do a design system. Someone else jump in.
I'm nosy. I'm checking out that protocol site that you just shared. I was like, ooh, I want to see what you're talking about.
So I think it's really interesting how you brought up how the design system is the source of truth for both engineering and design. So it's the single source of truth. There's not a design system and an engineering front end platform or something like that. It's one kind of source of truth.
Yeah.
Like,
honestly, I think from a development standpoint, I feel like, I'm not going to speak for everyone, but it's a very popular opinion, is that that relieves a lot of anxiety and stress for a developer. So picking a color, I'll be honest, my wife and I have the perfect relationship when it comes to this. I'm functionality, she is form. My office color, when we moved in, I was like, it just needs to be a newer paint because it was chipped and old. I don't care. And she was like, this will feel nice and it will look good in the sun. And like, she had an opinion about that. And so I think a lot of developers are very much like that, right? And so to have your assets, your colors, and a whole bunch of other things, you know, that relate to that, like, first off, there's going to be some that are going to be like, I mean, I'll just be honest. I'll throw some of the developers under the bus, and I'm guilty of this as well. It's like, well, if you didn't provide it for me, I'm just going to find something free on the internet, right? Like, and that has bitten so many people in the butt, like so many times. It won't scale, or it's copyright infringed, or users don't like it, so on and so forth. But like when I worked with Alec, and he gave me like, oh yeah, these are the color codes we used, and then I could go and, you know, as a contractor, I could then take those, find out where it is in code, and then like reuse it. Now I don't have to make that decision anymore. I don't have to go to his Figma every single time and figure out what I'm doing. Like, it was all in one central place, and it made my life, first off, I was able to push out code a lot faster. And second, I didn't have to ask anyone those targeted questions that were like, what do I do for this? Which would ultimately like lead to that's a stupid question. It's over here. And I'm like, well, it's not stupid to me. I didn't know.
Yeah. So. Do you have anything to add, Karina?
Yeah, it's a little harder on our end. I know our design team, they try to do that, and they work with development to have, you know, we try to have some cohesion there, but it's, one, the maturity there is still kind of early stages, and then two, when you have there's a lot of still siloing, especially in the agency world, because you're still trying to crank out work faster, that no one comes together or stays long enough to be able to create a effective, cohesive design system. So, I mean, you have the framework of one, but you don't really have something that's, you know, hey, here you go, that's all the information you need.
Yeah, so we got some questions coming from the audience now, and we're tight on time, so I want to get to these real quick. Great question from Gaia. I'm curious what kind of visuals or documentation that I'm assuming this is for the developers that they've used to communicate about system architecture, data structure, or other technical limitations that affect design possibilities. So how you're kind of communicating those or visualizing those.
Yeah, that is a great question. We don't. It's an in-person thing. Like, there's no way to like. We have our own form of documentation, whether you're using Atlassian products and you're at minimum using a wiki page on a GitHub repository, whatever it is you're using. It would be a crap move on our part to just be like, oh, you know, read this article over, and then assume that you're going to be able to derive your answer from that document. So I think Karina and Max's suggestion and their practice of including a developer in some way, shape, or form is like really your best bet. There's no real software solution. Honestly, like Figma has been, we've all tooted that, but that's been like the first sort of attempt. It's still very designer heavy, but it has some developer inclusions now. Like for instance, here's a good example. There's a component library tool called Storybook, and they're starting to incorporate direct links into Figma. And there are other software that's like that as well, that they're trying to take the developer tools and the designer tools and make bridges between them. Yeah. Exactly. And so that's still very young though, and still very green.
What were you going to add, Max?
No, +1 to Storybook. I think that's a great call out for a great plugin. A lot of that does come down to like whiteboarding and like actually, I feel like it's tough to bring technical limitations into it. One thing though, and this piggybacks off of Karina, like doing some research before you have your call, is doing a proof of as a developer. If they want to do something and I'm struggling with it, I'll go and make a proof of concept to show here's what I think you want that I'm close to, but I can't do explicitly. Now that is a little bit more agency work where a lot of times it's a brand new project a lot of times, so where proof of concepts make sense. But I would say even for someone if they're working on a single product, I think you could absolutely do that. But bringing like some sort of best effort rather than saying it doesn't work that way and like silly designer, and like having, again, some very much mutual respect, or like here's a playground of some things that I think of what you want. And I'm, you know, it's so context specific. The one thing I was going to add about design systems to make them work is you need to have a stakeholder who owns it and they need to be open for improvements because no one.
Oh my God, yes.
So I wanted to say that I was like, oh, I need to add this one thing. Okay, sorry, Alex.
Yeah,
Get through the questions. Go for it.
Okay, so Shara wanted to ask, what is the best way to get a dev behind a design that is a really heavy lift for them, but the UX research points that this is the best direction kind of to go to? So how do you, even if you look at a feature and you see this is going to be really, really hard, but there's research, there's proof kind of that says this is the right direction to go.
Data is where it's at. In fact, that's not even a real argument. If you can break your subjectivity, because I say that as a developer, I've used it way more to stop a dumb design than me having to implement a design I don't want to do.
Yeah.
Because and it's that give and take. Oh my gosh, if the data says it's going to work, well, it's going to suck. We better go build it, and them's the breaks. No,
I completely agree. And I'll come there, and I will show the data, whether it's, research metrics, heat mapping, and I'm like, this is your assumption, but like, this is what the data show. We have examples, like this is why it needs to be done. So data, I absolutely agree with Max.
I will tell you that is the biggest fault I have ever, if there was a one thing that I can improve on development, it is being attached to a feature. And it's because they made this thing and they love it and they don't want it to go away. And it's ironic because development pride themselves on continuous deployment, continuous development, and MVP, but they get so attached to this feature. And I'm like, why? Like that does it, why? Just realize that you spent weeks, a month, whatever on that. But like, if your users aren't using it, why? And so I will say that like, you realistically in the ideal world, you shouldn't have to convince them, right? Like, it really shouldn't. There should be a conversation and they want to get informed on maybe why you went with that decision, but you shouldn't have to convince them.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. So, okay, so we are like right at time. I do want to announce next week we have, let me pull up my thing here. Did you want to hit something, Max?
No, my battery's at 6%. I can't believe I made it through this call. Just a quick thank you to Alec for having us on. This has been so much fun.
Absolutely.
I'll jump. If there's any other questions that we didn't answer, we're all on the Techloma Slack, so we can jump in there and answer stuff to give our perspective. But thank you for having us.
Yeah, great call out for sure. No, it was great having. I mean, y'all.
Oh no, Alec, you're breaking up. I can't hear you.
Yeah. Oh, I'm also at like 1%, so I'm like, I don't know if it's you guys or me.
Amazing. Okay. Well, we're wrapping up then, so that's okay. Okay, so next month, the last Wednesday of June, we are going to have another talk with Oklahoma City Design+Tech. We're going to have Stephen Wakabayashi, who's the founder of QTBIPOC Design, which is an organization that provides free and accessible design education, mentorship, and networking opportunities to LGBTQ designers of color. And they're going to be presenting just a talk on that. And kind of, we're really excited to have them and have Stephen here to come and speak with us. We welcome all designers in the LGBTQ community to participate in the talk and to support our community. So thank you all for coming. Doji, put up the talk end slide. There we go.